Dr. Winstrip is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all very much for being here today. You know, the actions taken on October 7th seemingly were unimaginable, yet something, unfortunately, I contend, predictable, sadly. This was not for defense of someone's families. It was not for love of a culture or heritage, but for a hate of one singular ethnic group. Complete hatred. It was mentioned today, the final solution. They're not talking about a solution, a two-state solution. It's their final solution. Maybe this is by the grace of God, but we were cleaning the house and a picture frame opened up in the back, an old newspaper came out. And I'm going to submit this article for the record from April
Without objection.
1994. It's an AP piece in the Cincinnati Enquirer. Troops leave, stones lobbed. These are troops leaving Gaza in 1994. So even though the moving was a visible sign of Israel's intent to leave, Palestinian youths with slingshots lobbed stones that bounce off the walls and the olive drab jeeps. Youths screaming, "We don't want peace." "There will be stones every day," shouted the youths, many aligned with the Islamic fundamentalist Hamas group that opposes the Israel-PLO peacemaking process. There it is. It's 30 years later. Now they're middle-aged. They're fighting age. This is the very root of this. And I'm glad we're talking about things that the United States can do and that we can do in the region and everything else. But this is the root cause. But now I'm concerned that very hatred that is taught, obviously, from the day they are born is happening here and happening in our universities. It's an upbringing of hatred. We talk about the FBI and the IRS, and those are some things we can certainly do. We talk about national strategy. Should we have a national strategy? We should. I contend we should make sure we sanction and cut off any type of funding from anywhere in the world, including within our own country, that in some way, shape, or form ends up in the hands of Hamas.
Hear, hear.
We can do that. We, the United States, can do that, and we need to do that. I'm concerned about our universities. This is terrible. Every one of us has universities near us, and we send our kids to universities. This is not the type of thing I was taught growing up. That's for sure. So I have seen in Florida, and I would like to associate myself with the questions of Mr. LaHood and to you, Ms. Tishby, when Florida is shutting down chapters of SJP. What kind of an effect is that having? Will that have, do we think, as far as maybe changing the tenor and the mindset?
Well, that was a blessed moment. You know, we all appreciated that a lot because we've been doing this work for a very long time, and we really appreciate, all of us on this bench really appreciate that you are all here and are listening. There are hundreds of examples of how SJP harasses students on college campus. And GW, they screened on the wall, "Glory to our martyrs," right after the massacre, right? And I want to make sure, by the way, that we know that this is not a little terrorist attack. This is not 5, 4, 6, 19 terrorists. This was a battalion of 3,000 militant terrorists, psychopaths that have attacked Israel. Glory to our martyrs, to the same people who opened up a woman's belly when she's pregnant and pulled out her fetus. In the University of North Carolina, they chanted, "We are all Hamas." This is what SJP does on campus. Just like terror, they terrorize Jewish kids on campus. They terrorize Jewish kids on campus. They make them afraid. The reason Talia is so brave is because she knows that to be a person who is a Zionist, who's Jewish, who's an American, a Christian, or a Muslim, anybody who supports Israel on campus, you will get terrorized. This is what they do, and we need to stop this. And I want to commend you again for being here, because we know what it's like to be a kid on campus. This is being with the not cool crowd. This is being pushed out of the quote-unquote cool spaces. So we need to give her applaud and actually make it great again to support Israel and to support and be a proud Zionist. And again, all of you here, we're really grateful for what you're doing. And with the help of the good Lord, we will, and you, kick SJP off of every campus in America and around the world.
And we support freedom of religion, period. It's in our Constitution.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Talia, I will tell you, this government sends a lot of money to universities. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Pascrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to each of the panelists. The barbaric acts and attacks by Hamas are heartbreaking, stomach-turning, sheer evil. We could have had a bipartisan House response that it was outrageous. When we left out humanitarian help and conditioned Israel aid on tax relief for the ultra-wealthy. Could have. We must also guard against terror and hate at home, and we've heard about that today. And my request, the President sought $200 million more for the nonprofit security grant program. It's been successful. We started it many years ago in the Homeland Security Committee. Jonathan, you know about that. These dollars are needed to protect synagogues, mosques, churches, community centers across America facing renewed threats. The tax-exempt organization like Hillel at Rutgers and Princeton and so many others across the country could be eligible. We didn't even include a single cent for this program in the bipartisan package, not 1 cent. According to the ADL, and I'm sorry if you become my Bible, but you have. You've been fair to everybody. Not many organizations are fair to everybody. Isn't it peace that we seek? Or is it settling? We've been in nearly 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents across the country since Hamas massacred so many people. We're seeing a more than 200% increase in Islamophobic incidents. This is the largest rise since Donald Trump's shameful Muslim ban. That solved a lot. Colleagues have reported a startling surge of threats and violence, particularly against Jewish, but some Muslim students. We live in America. No one should face hatred. No one should face vitriol because of their heritage. I've sounded the alarm on domestic extremism for 15 years, got mostly the deaf ear from both Republicans and Democrats. It's historically in the books. I fight every year for more funding to protect nonprofits. Today's hearing only reinforces the need for emergency funding for nonprofit security grants. This is all empty talk. Actions matter, as was said. Put a full bipartisan security supplemental on the floor. I'm willing to vote for it. Finally, I see one of the witnesses here, Mr. Shanzer. You mentioned me by name. I hope I have the courtesy of responding. In your testimony, you impugned the integrity and loyalty of my constituents. What he implies is total rubbish. My constituents have the right to petition their government just like you, just like me. So, Mr. Greenblatt, I appreciate the ADL's consistent support of the program I'm talking about. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the ADL and a coalition of national Jewish organizations, including Hillel. The letter calls on the Biden administration to include emergency nonprofit security grant funding in its security supplemental package. To the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Greenblatt, can you please expand on the importance of these grants and why do we need additional funding quickly for these essential grants?
So the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, and Congressman Pascrell, you deserve credit for your leadership on this for so long. It protects synagogues and Jewish schools. It protects churches. It protects HBCUs. It allows these institutions to fortify themselves from the threats that are real. And I think about the shooting that took place at the Dollar General in Jacksonville earlier this year. The shooter went to a local HBCU and was deterred because of the campus security funded by this grant program. And I think about the earlier comments about Pittsburgh. We just honored the 5-year anniversary of that deadliest day in America. And again, had they had the Nonprofit Security Grant Program in place and they had the adequate funding there, many lives might have been saved. We saw shootings in the past year in California at Asian American churches. Again, had they had access to the funding, lives could have been saved. This is not a red or blue issue. This is not a Jewish or Christian or Muslim issue. This is everyone's issue and everyone's opportunity. So we would strongly advise or second the idea of more money to fund the Nonprofit Security Grant Program.
Mr. Speaker, can I just conclude on a point quickly?
Conclude quickly, please.
We're here, as I see it, and correct my perception. Well, we're here, as I see it, to find a way to bring people together. I mean, that's the purpose of the Congress. Try to avoid conflict, but certainly stand up and be against violence. And I would hope that what would come out of this committee, any committee, is not only good intentions, but also that we understand that there's a history here. You cannot pass legislation to undo history. And we have to understand in context the very problems that we are talking about. And I've been interpreted by some as saying, well, then you're someone who simply wants to look the other way. I don't want to look the other way. But I want to be fair about it. Because the rest has failed in what we tried to do in order to help the peace. We need to rethink it together. Together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Smucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing. Thank you to each of the witnesses. A lot has been said here today that I agree with. I do just want to mention, number one, there's no equivalency between what Hamas did, the horrific attacks, and Israel defending itself. And I think it's important that's said. And I think the article that Mr. Winthrop found highlights that years ago, the Palestinians could have chosen peace and prosperity and coexisting with Israel and have chosen instead violence and destruction for many, many years. And so we stand with Israel and Israel's right to defend itself. And, you know, we had a hearing on this yesterday in another committee, and it's just it's still unbelievable to me that we're seeing what we're seeing on our college campuses. There was a student from Princeton who said essentially the Jewish students have retreated to the Jewish centers because they don't feel that they can participate in campus life, and it's sad to see. We've seen Jewish students violently attacked with microphones, forced to lock themselves in a library in their dorms because they fear for their own safety, and it's just hard for me to believe that that's happening today. In my own district, Millersville University students were targeted when a man drew 2 swastikas on campus. One of the things I want to focus on today, though, and just get your thoughts, and maybe one of the themes of this hearing is the money that's flowing into universities, and then where universities are spending their money, and whether this has some impact on the positions that they're taking. And I'd like some of you to speak to that. We know that foreign countries are investing heavily in our universities, and they could potentially be abusing our U.S. tax system while they're doing that. And in some cases, this is certainly countries that do not share our democratic values. And so, Mr. Schanzer, just want to ask about college endowments, reporting requirements for foreign investments. What steps should we be concerned? And if so, what steps should Congress take to ensure that these colleges and universities are fully disclosing where funds are coming from and then are not investing tuition and donor dollars into countries which actively oppose the U.S.?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm going to direct my comments here specifically to the country of Qatar. And there's a reason for that, because the Qataris are a state sponsor of Hamas. They are right now being looked at as an intermediary that may be able to help return those 240 hostages that are being held in Gaza right now. But we know that the country of Qatar has been giving hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas over the years, and they have an office. And in that office, we've actually seen the video of some of those Hamas operatives cheering as they saw the news break on 10/7, and the Qataris have not kicked them out. I'm going to cite a couple of numbers here, and they're staggering. Qatari expenditures on American universities between 2002 and 2023 exceeds $4.7 billion. This is a country, I should just remind you, of 300,000 people, okay? They have been spending an average of $250 million per year. It's been actually $3 billion between 2013 and 2019. There was a moment actually in Texas where Texas A&M, which has been receiving funds from the Qataris, they did not want to disclose. There was a lawsuit that ultimately had to be filed, and eventually that money was revealed.
I only have I'd love to hear more, but I only have another minute. And by the way, Cornell is one that has received up to $1.5 billion.
Almost $2 billion.
In funding from Arab countries, specifically Qatar and Saudi Arabia and others.
Correct.
Do you think these colleges are endangering student safety and academic integrity by accepting these funds? And do we know what these countries are receiving in return?
We don't know what the countries are receiving in return. And that's a huge problem. And we need to see the contracts. We need to see what the universities agreed to in order to receive those funds. And it's not happening. The Department of Education is actually woefully behind in tracking these disclosures. That is something that I would hope that this committee would look into.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Estes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for showing up for this this critical hearing and talking to this issue that's so vital to the world, and we're seeing the impact as we look at all the news the last 6 weeks. Your testimony's certainly been impactful and heart-wrenching. It's sad that we have to convene on a topic of anti-Semitism following the atrocities that occurred in Israel. I'm disgusted even after hearing reports and seeing footage of Hamas slaughtering families and babies and abducting hundreds of other civilians. There are some here in the United States that call the barbaric invasion and massacre exhilarating. Yet that was the word used by the university professor within our borders. These are heinous acts that we should all denounce, and rooting out anti-Semitism and standing with our ally Israel is not a partisan issue. As mentioned earlier, yesterday, hundreds of thousands of Americans rallied here in our nation's capital, and leaders of both political parties spoke in solidarity with our Jewish friends and allies. Yet on our college campuses, what should be the bastion of knowledge, students and faculty have abandoned the history of the State of Israel and the facts of the ongoing war, and have instead sided with a terrorist organization that is intent on wiping out the Jewish people and rallying around the cries of death to America. And U.S. officials have confirmed that Hamas is using hospitals as command centers and armories. So why are the most rabid anti-Semites and the most vocal Hamas backers on our U.S. college campuses and often in positions of prominence? Universities seem to have become a safe harbor for anti-Semitic and anti-American rhetoric, and it's actually frightening to uncover the financial ties between higher education funding and anti-Semitism. You know, a recent report, as mentioned earlier, about from the National Contagion Research Institute highlights about the $13 million in unreported foreign contributions to approximately 200 U.S. colleges and universities. A common thread between these institutions of higher education was greater exposure to anti-Semitic rhetoric. Not only that, but even student groups such as Students for Justice in Palestine are linked to unsavory organizations that once had ties to terrorism and potential financial links to Hamas. On top of that, the leadership at many of these colleges have been slow to respond, giving the impression that they condone the anti-Semitic and antagonistic methods of the student population. Today, I'm grateful to have you folks here that are standing up to anti-Semitism and boldly supporting the state of Israel. Mr. Schanzer, you studied Middle Eastern history extensively. What's your take when you hear college students say that Palestinians are only trying to defend against colonialization and that the Jewish people are on stolen land? Where's our education system gone wrong in that process?
Mr. Congressman, thank you so much for that question. I'll just say that I believe that Middle Eastern studies in America has failed over the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years. It has been utterly corrupted. We see tenured professors teaching opinion and not fact. When you go back and you look at the history of this conflict, there was a partition plan that was proposed before the state of Israel was established. There was going to be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state living side by side. The Palestinians rejected it, as did the surrounding Arab states. Israel ended up winning a great deal of that territory in a hard-fought war from 1948 to 1949. Israel still held out hope that it might be able to make peace with its neighbors. And then there was war in 1956, another war in 1967. Every time the Israelis offered up a peace agreement, it was met with rejection. There was the famous 3 no's from Khartoum, from the Arab League, where they said no recognition, no negotiation, and no peace. This has been the history, the tragic history of the Middle East, where we could have seen peace agreements forged. It has not happened, and yet what we see from professors on our campuses is the vilification of Israel, which has been the one party that has been willing to make peace over these years.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good short rendition of what really has happened, and we need to be aware of that. Mr. Greenblatt, how has the indoctrination of hatred towards Jews by Hamas and Palestinian authorities been utilized to ramp up such hatred, particularly in the Middle East, but I mean, to some degree throughout the United States as well?
Throughout the United States, Mr. Congressman, I'm glad you asked. I mean, what we've seen, and I would attribute much of this to the normalization of anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism is the ideology that says Jews don't have the same rights that we would afford to Palestinians or other people. Zionism, as Noah was saying, has been demonized. It's just the idea that Jews have the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. That's it. It doesn't exclude Palestinians. There's no ethnocentric dimension to it, just the right to self-determination. But the normalization of anti-Zionism is this ugly trend, and it's really come through these universities. And let me be crystal clear for the record. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, period, full stop. And you know who knows this well? Talia knows this well. The students know this well because they see what's happening in these Middle Eastern studies departments that Dr. Schanzer talked about and what's happening out of the classroom on the quad. I mean, these incidences are really almost indescribable, and we wouldn't tolerate it if it happened against any other group of students, nor should we. Imagine if in a world where we were upset about Beijing's policies, we saw students vandalizing Chinese restaurants. Or imagine if they were demonstrating outside the Asia Studies Center. We would say that is indescribably bad and unacceptable, just as this is. And it needs to stop now.
Well, thank you. And